Imagine standing in a medieval shipyard at dawn, the sea mist clinging to the air and an overwhelming strange smell filling your lungs. It isn't the scent of salt or the ocean breeze. It's the thick, smoky odor of tar, black, sticky, and glistening like oil everywhere you look. Men move slowly through the haze, brushing this dark liquid onto wooden ships that gleam like whetstone in the morning light. You might wonder, why cover something as beautiful as a ship in something so foul? Yet that very black coating, born from burning pine deep in northern forests, was what stood between life and death for every sailor who ever went to sea. This is the quiet, forgotten story of how medieval shipbuilders trusted tar more than timber, a tale of fire, wood, and survival that held entire empires afloat. Stay with me till the end, and you'll never think of the smell of pine, smoke, or the sea in quite the same way again. If you were to wander through a medieval shipyard on an early morning, before the bell at the church tower had finished tolling prime, you'd find that the air itself carried a smell you'd never forget. It wasn't the clean salt of the sea or the crisp wind rolling off the waves. It was heavier, thicker, sweet and bitter at once. The smell of tar clung to everything. It filled the wood, the clothes, the hair of the men who worked there. It lingered in the air even after the ships had sailed. Tar, sticky, black, shining like oil under sunlight. It was, to the men who built and maintained ships, the most important material in the world, even more essential than the timber it coated. Timber gave a ship its form, its skeleton, and its strength. But tar gave it life. Tar was the difference between a ship that floated and one that slowly drowned. To understand this, you must step back into the world before waterproof paints and chemical resins. Before shipbuilding was a science of steel and rivets. A medieval ship was a living thing made of wood that swelled, shrank, cracked, absorbed, and decayed. Seawater was its enemy. Every wave that struck its hull tried to pull it apart. The fibers of the planks drank the salt, softened, and warped. Fungi took root. Worms bored into the damp grain. Even when the hull appeared whole, tiny cracks and seams formed between planks, allowing the ocean to whisper its way inside, and so to hold back the sea. The medieval shipwright turned to tar and pitch, thick, glistening substances made from the slow fire of pine. It was not a glamorous process. No songs were sung about tar. No records celebrated the men who made it. Yet the whole age of medieval trade and exploration, the cogs that carried wool and wine, the fishing boats that fed whole coasts, the galleys that fought in foreign wars, floated because of it. The story of tar began far from the ports and shipyards, deep in the forests of the north. In Scandinavia, where endless pine woods rolled over the land, men learned how to coax the very lifeblood of trees into a form that resisted the sea. They built pits in the earth, called tar kilns, large, sloping mounds of timber covered in turf and clay. Inside these mounds, they stacked pine logs and branches, arranging them carefully so that air could barely reach. Then they lit small fires around the edges, letting the wood smolder rather than burn. The heat drew out the pine's resin, sticky, aromatic sap, which trickled down into a collection trough at the base of the kiln. The process took days. The workers, often peasants or forest laborers, stayed close to the fire, feeding it, watching the smoke's color to judge the heat. Pale smoke meant too cold. Dark smoke meant too hot. The perfect temperature turned wood into char and resin into liquid tar. The smell was thick and cloying, filling the forest with a haze that stung the eyes. By the end of the burn, the ground was slick with black tar, slow-moving as honey. The men collected it in barrels, sealing them tight with wooden stoppers. Each barrel represented the destruction of many trees and the labor of many hands. And then, after the tar cooled, it began its long journey, downriver to ports like Stockholm or Turku, then by ship to England, Flanders, France, or the Hanseatic cities of Germany for centuries. The Baltic Sea was the world's tar barrel. From these cold northern lands came almost all the tar used by European shipbuilders. It was a trade that smelled of smoke and pine, and it was as important as the spice trade that came from the east. Without it, ships would rot, ropes would fray, and the sea would claim its due. In England, barrels of tar arrived in coastal towns where shipyards buzzed with work. Bristol, Southampton, Hull, and the Thames shipyards all depended on a steady supply. Once opened, the barrels were heated, usually over open fires, though that risked explosion or ignition. The caulkers and pitchers, the craftsmen who sealed ships, were blackened by the fumes. They melted the tar into a glossy liquid, stirring it with long-handled paddles until it ran smooth and even. Then they used brushes, rags, or bare hands to spread it over the hulls. The process was slow, rhythmic, and strangely quiet. You could almost imagine the scene: the soft slap of brushes against wood, the occasional hiss of cooling tar when it touched damp timber, and the murmur of men working in the heat of the day. Beneath them, the ship rested on wooden supports, its hull curving like the belly of a whale. The planks, freshly sanded and joined, glowed faintly before the tar darkened them into a mirror-like sheen. Caulkers first filled every seam with oakum, shredded hemp or flax fibers soaked in oil. They hammered it deep between the planks with wooden mallets and flat irons, sealing gaps that no nail could close. Then came the tar. Heated until it bubbled, it was poured or brushed onto the seams, soaking into the oakum, filling the smallest cracks. Finally, the entire hull was coated, sometimes even the masts, decks, and rigging. When it cooled, it hardened into a waterproof skin. The smell of tar clung to every sailor in every dock. Travelers often described entering a port town and smelling the sea before they saw it, but what they really smelled was tar. It coated the ropes, the sails, the barrels, even the air. The odor was a mark of life at sea, so familiar that men carried it with pride. There was danger in it too. Tar was highly flammable, and shipyards were full of fire. One spark from a forge, one careless movement near a boiling cauldron, and the entire dock could go up in flames. Fires caused by tar were recorded in several major ports, entire warehouses of barrels igniting like torches. Yet shipbuilders accepted the risk. They knew no other substance could do what tar did. Medieval people understood tar as something elemental, born from wood, purified by fire, hardened by air. They didn't know its chemistry, but they knew its character. It could burn or it could protect. It could destroy or preserve. There was a superstition, even, that a ship sealed with poor tar was cursed. Tar that ran too thin or smelled wrong was said to bring bad luck at sea. Shipwrights tested it by touch. If it stuck cleanly to their fingers and drew a smooth thread when pulled, it was good. If it clumped or smelled sour, it was cast aside. The work of tarring was not glamorous, but it was steady. The men who did it rarely went to sea, yet they were as vital as any captain. They kept the ocean where it belonged, outside the ship. Their pay was small, their health often ruined by fumes, but their skill was valued. Some towns even held small feasts for ship caulkers after a fleet's successful departure, thanking them for sealing the sea from the wood. As the Middle Ages progressed, shipbuilding became a vast enterprise. Merchant fleets connected the North Sea to the Mediterranean. The Hanseatic League, a powerful trading alliance of cities like Lübeck, Hamburg, and Danzig, relied heavily on tarred ships to carry goods safely through freezing waters. These ships were not elegant, broad, heavy cogs with high sides and flat bottoms, but they were tough. Their hulls, coated in thick layers of tar and pitch, resisted the ice and salt in the south, where oak forests were fewer. Shipbuilders sometimes used resin or oil instead of tar, but it was never quite the same. Northern tar had a texture and endurance that no substitute matched. And so, barrels continued to arrive from Scandinavia, sometimes even used as ballast on ships that carried timber. Iron, or furs, the trade in tar was steady but invisible. Unlike silk or spice, it was not a luxury. It was a necessity. Kings and admirals rarely spoke of it, yet without it, their fleets would crumble. Chronicles of warships often mention their guns, their sails, their admirals, but never the black hands of the men who coated their hulls. Yet it was tar that kept the great English and French fleets alive during centuries of naval rivalry. The life of a ship without tar was short. Records from the 13th century mention vessels rotting after only a few years if they were not properly sealed. With regular tarring, a ship might last 20 years or more, a fortune saved in timber and labor. Tar preserved wealth as much as wood. It also preserved rope. Sailors coated their rigging with tarred hemp, making it weatherproof. The blackened ropes were rough and stiff, but they resisted mold and salt better than bare fiber. This, too, filled the air with the smell of tar. Sailors' hands were perpetually stained black, and their hair often carried a smoky sheen from the rigging they handled daily. The entire life of a seaman, the touch, the smell, even the sound of creaking tarred rope revolved around. If you were to stand on a medieval quay at dusk, watching ships sway against their moorings, you'd see how the setting sun glimmered on the tar-coated hulls. They shone like whetstone, streaked with the marks of brushes, warm to the touch from the day's sun. The smell of smoke and pine filled the cool air. Somewhere nearby, a pot of tar still bubbled, tended by a yawning apprentice. It was a scene of quiet endurance, not the kind of history that fills books, but the kind that kept the world turning. Even today, traces of that ancient craft remain. Wooden boats in Northern Europe are still sealed with pine tar, made by methods nearly identical to those used in the Middle Ages. The process is so old that its steps have no written inventor. It passed from hand to hand, father to son, worker to apprentice, unchanged through centuries. What's most striking about tar is that it represents a perfect harmony between destruction and preservation. The same fire that could burn a forest to ash was harnessed to protect ships made from its trees. The same sticky substance that made men curse when it stuck to their clothes also kept them alive at sea. Tar was a paradox, ugly yet beautiful, simple yet indispensable. In the medieval world, almost every material had to be earned through patience. Metal was mined, smelted, hammered. Cloth was spun and dyed. But tar was cooked, drawn out of wood through a kind of alchemy. It was the art of coaxing the forest to give up its protection, to let one life save another. The forests that supplied Europe's tar burned slowly, year after year. Entire regions of pine were devoted to the trade. In parts of Sweden and Finland, villages built their wealth around tar pits, producing thousands of barrels for export. When ships grew larger in the 14th and 15th centuries, demand exploded. Tar became a currency of its own, taxed, measured, traded, and sometimes smuggled. For all its importance, tar remained humble. No medieval poem celebrated it, no painting glorified its makers. But it was there, quietly underpinning the age of wooden ships. Every voyage across the North Sea, every trade route through the Baltic, every fishing expedition, all of them relied on the glossy dark layer that sealed planks and repelled waves, and yet, it's worth remembering that even tar had limits. It could keep out water, but not time. Ships eventually rotted, even those most lovingly coated. The men who made the tar, who tended the fires deep in the forest, often died coughing from smoke. The caulkers in the shipyards grew old with blackened hands and aching lungs. The sea always took its toll, one way or another, still. Tar was a kind of promise, a human answer to the ocean's endless hunger. It said, "We know you will take this ship eventually, but not today." As you drift into the slow rhythm of history, you can imagine that ancient shipyard again, the smell of burning pine, the soft scrape of brushes, the quiet conversation of men who worked without hurry. They did not know they were part of something larger, that their simple, sticky craft would make possible centuries of exploration and empire. To them, it was just work. To us, it was the foundation of the maritime world when you see a medieval ship in a museum, gleaming under low light, its wooden planks still faintly darkened. You are looking at the ghost of tar. It has lost its smell, but not its memory. The smoothness of the wood, the faint sheen, the way it has resisted rot for hundreds of years, all of it owes itself to that black resin, born of fire, poured by human hands. And that perhaps is why medieval shipbuilders trusted tar more than timber. Timber could crack and betray them. It was strong, but also stubborn. Tar, on the other hand, was loyal. It filled every flaw, forgave every gap. It held the ship together even when the waves struck hardest. It was, in its strange, sticky way, a symbol of faith. Faith in human craft, in fire's discipline, and in the quiet art of keeping the sea at bay. Tar was not beautiful. It was not heroic, but it endured. And that endurance, black, smoky, uncelebrated, was what allowed the world to sail. And that's where we'll leave our shipbuilders, their hands stained with tar, their work quietly holding the world. Together, one plank at a time, if you've made it this far. Thank you for sailing through history with me tonight, here at Quiet Boring Sleep. We drift through the small, forgotten details that built our world, the kind of calm, steady stories that let your mind wander and rest. If you enjoyed this slow journey through the shipyards of the past, I'd be grateful if you'd leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you can join me for the next quiet story from history. Until then, close your eyes, let the waves of time fade into the distance, and have a peaceful night.